First dog I ever known. Her name was Sin, C-Y-N. But being a theology major, I did that on purpose. The next dog I owned, her name was Annie. They were both black labs. Loved those animals. I no longer own a dog. I no longer have a pet. I feel like I'm living in a bubble when it comes to other species, just me. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not exposed to other species. Every morning I have quiet time, and I've positioned my chair on the second story as it looks out over my front yard. And in my townhouse and the townhouses across, I can watch people walking their dogs. And there's a part of me that misses that. And then there's a part of me that is glad I don't have a dog anymore and those responsibilities. Right next to where I live, there's a park. I'll go walking around. And in my walk, I'll see a squirrel, I'll see a rabbit, I'll hear birds, occasionally see them in the trees. That's about it. That's about all the exposure that I'm getting right now to the species around us, except occasionally on TV. Yep. That's when I see the wild animals. You know the ones I'm talking about. Shark Week. I love the one, and I don't know why I do this to myself, but there's a show it's all about predators, talking about animals. And I watch that for two reasons. Number one, it puts me in awe. Number two, it scares me. I want those both emotions to be felt. So I become aware that I live in a world far greater than just where I live on Longmont. But again, I still feel like I live in this bubble. So this week, when Church and Society reminded me that this was species awareness focus, it gave me an opportunity to read and think and reflect upon who we as humans are, what our relationship is to other species. And I came to this amazing conclusion. I realize that I see, and I imagine if you see, creatures here for our benefit. That creatures are here for my well-being. I mean, think about it. They provide a significant portion of my diet. The clothes that I wear. The medicine that people take. Even cosmetics, which I don't wear. However, some of you have suggested if I'm going to be in the pulpit and that light's shining on me, I ought to put some up on here. We use them for entertainment. The other day I watched the Kentucky Derby and tried to put it in my mind and dismiss it, the idea of the abuse that some of those racehorses experience. And I realized that the majority of species on our planet are here for our well-being. And then I asked the other question. Am I here, are we here on this planet for their well-being? Is that important, that we are here for their well-being? Or is it just unilateral? It comes our direction and that's it? Well, there's some individuals who believe that it only goes one way. That we are the ones that they are here to serve. That the only reason they exist is for two utilitarian reasons. It's called dominion theology. And they open up the Bible and they turn to the creation story in Genesis chapter 1 and they read the following. So God created humankind in God's image. In the likeness of God, God created him. Male and female, God created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it." That's a nice word. The word in its original meaning has the idea of dominate it, rule over it, have dominion over it. And I'm talking about the fish of the sea and the birds of the heaven and over every animal that moves upon the earth. That's dominion theology. And individuals who support this look at Genesis 1 and say, "See, this is proof that they are here for us. They are here for our benefit. That's why the animals are here." Others turn to a passage in Psalm chapter 8 where it says the following: "When I look at the night sky and see the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you set in place, what are mere mortals that you should think about them? Human beings that you should care for them. Yet you made them only a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor." They look at this and say, "See, it's about us. In the pyramid, we're at the top. Everything trickles down from there. Oh, and by the way, let me finish the passage. You, God, gave them charge of everything you made. You caused them to exercise authority over everything." And this next is an example of where translations at times make it nice. It says, "putting all things under their authority." In the original language, it says, "placing all things under their feet." The flocks and the herds, all the wild animals, the birds in the sky, the fish in the sea, and everything that swims in the ocean. They're under my feet. They're under your feet. They're here to serve us. Wayne Grudem, a theologian, who in his book Systematic Theology, an Introduction to Biblical Doctrine, says the following: "The world and all its creatures were made for man. And he, being made in the image of God, is their natural master. Animals and plants serve as food, clothing, labor, and companionship, and their value is determined by how they serve human ends." Is she watching? You see, she's the one in charge of species awareness. You know, these texts I've read to you, ministers will stand up front and try to soft pedal it. But let's be honest. Let's be honest with the text. This was a worldview that was prevalent during the time in which the Old Testament was written. But like Paul Harvey said, for the rest of the story, because there was a time in the history of humanity that we were not on the top. There was a time in our history where we were the prey. When you study our story, our journey through evolution, early on, we were the prey. I mean, look at your skin. Not very good protection, is it? You don't have a hard shell over you. You don't have a lot of, well, I was going to say, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. I don't have a lot of hair over me. We don't have claws. We don't have fangs. When it comes to defensive weapons that are built into our bodies, we're not very good. So the only way we survived was learning how to coexist with all these other species. Watching them, observing them, listening to them, learning their patterns, when it was safe for us to be out, where we could be. We tried to coexist with them. And that was the only way we were going to make it. That's about 2 or 3 million years ago. At about the 200,000 years ago, there was a shift that began to take place. And we began to be hunters. It was actually by accident it happened. We started using tools. Sometimes I wonder if we were watching the monkeys and wondering why they were using different objects for different purposes. Whatever that was, we started using tools, and then we realized one time that something that we used to mash corn with, we could also use to mash each other with. We began to realize that sharp objects could penetrate, and we became hunters. But in that process, we also understood that we had to work together, but we also had to be aware of the rest of nature. Which animals were safe to hunt? Which animals you better not hunt alone? When was the best time to hunt? And you only hunted and killed when it was required and needed because it was such a large task. So even though we had moved from prey to hunters, we still very much coexisted and lived in humility and with reverence with all of creation. Now remember what I said at the very beginning, that first creation story in Genesis 1. It gives this picture of dominion, but there's another creation story sitting right next to it. Genesis 1 is written by one individual. Genesis 2 is written by another individual. And that worldview of dominion is complemented or perhaps even set aside by another worldview, and that's in chapter 2. And the writer does some amazing things when it describes the creation of humans and the creation of species. Listen to what they do. Verse 7. When Yahweh God formed the man out of dust from the ground, God blew into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living creature. Now listen to how it describes the creation of species. And out of the ground. Remember what I just read to you? When Yahweh God formed the man from the dust from the ground. Animals are created out of the ground. When it creates humankind, it says that they are called living creatures. Listen to what it says about these species other than us. And whatever the man called that living creature. The writer in Genesis wants us to see this sense of coexisting, that the way that we are created is the way that all species were created. That there is this oneness that ties us all together. Later on, rather than saying to have dominion over everything, the writer says the following. And Yahweh God took the man and set him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it. And the original word here means to work it, to serve it, and to keep it. And that word implies the idea of to guard, to watch over. So while Genesis 1 says we are to have dominion and be lords and masters, Genesis 2 comes along and says, let's try caretakers. Let's try stewards. Richard Bauckham, in his book Bible and Ecology, says the following. Humans are placed within creation, not above it. The image of God is not a license to dominate, but a vocation to represent God's care for all creatures. So in the Bible, just those first 2 chapters, there's this tension between dominion over species and caring from species. And the reality is that tension still exists today, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. One writer said the following: "Today, the tension between dominion and stewardship shows up in how we treat other species, often without thinking." So, what I'm reading to you, again, is from someone else. So it's not me stepping on your toes right now. Do we buy meat from animals raised in suffering? Or seek out more humane sources? Or choose to go without? Do we support industries that exploit animals for fashion, entertainment, or testing? Or do we look for alternatives that honor life? Do we see animals as mere resources, or as fellow creatures with their own lives, their own needs, and their own worth? And then the writer ends with this: "And the question we must ask is not just what do animals give us, but how do our lives affect theirs?" A woman was driving down a 2-lane road in rural Tennessee. She wasn't driving fast because she realized that this part of the road, there were deer out right about dusk, the time that she was driving. As she came around the corner off to the side of the road and further ahead, she saw its eyes. She slowed down and the deer didn't move. And then she stopped. She said it almost looked like they were making eye contact. In her mind, she thought to herself, perhaps that deer wants me to know I'm here. I'm here. Even when you can't see me, I'm here. So do we see them? And if we do, how do we see them? Do we see them with a sense of us being in control? And how can they make our lives better? Or do we remember our ancient predecessors and realize that we all have to coexist? And that we have been given the privilege to care not only for each other, but for all of creation. Amen.